You know, there are some phrases we hear so often they just become part of the background. Simple truths we just accept. So today, we're going to take one of the most common sayings in America, put it under a microscope, and explore the much deeper and maybe more uncomfortable story the source material has to tell.
Yup, that's the one. Immigrants built America. We've all heard it, we've probably all said it. And look, the sources we're digging into today don't say it's wrong. Not at all. It's a huge, powerful, and really important part of the American story. But is it the whole story? And that question right there is what this is all about. The source material really pushes us to get the full picture, to look a little closer and ask, what? And maybe more importantly, who is that simple slogan leaving out?
All right, so let's dive into that. The core argument we're exploring here is that this powerful phrase, while true in its own way, is historically incomplete. It kind of mashes together two vastly different experiences into one single idea.
Okay, and this slide just lays it out so clearly. It draws a really sharp line in the sand. On one side, you have the immigrant story, people who chose to come, who got paid for their work, and who had a path, even if it was a hard one, to having rights. But then you look at the other side. The experience for enslaved Africans was the polar opposite. Forcibly taken, legally considered property, not people, and with absolutely no path to rights. The sources are crystal clear on this. These two experiences are fundamentally different.
And that's why the words we use matter so much. The sources suggest we use the term enslaved laborers instead of immigrants because it gets right to the heart of what was happening. We're talking about a system built on violent capture and forced work for profit, not a journey someone chose to take. And that's not just playing with words. It completely reframes the foundation of the entire conversation.
So now that we've made that distinction, we can really look at the sheer scale and economic power of this system of forced labor. I mean, this wasn't just a small part of the early American economy. In a lot of ways, it was the economy.
12.5 million. Just let that number sink in for a second. That is a staggering number of African people who were trafficked across the Atlantic. Now, while about 400,000 were brought directly to the lands that would become the U.S., it was their descendants, generation after generation of forced, unpaid labor, who became the literal engine that drove the nation's incredible economic growth.
And if you want to see just how central that engine was, just look at this chart. By 1860, right on the eve of the Civil War, cotton, which was planted, tended, and harvested almost exclusively by enslaved people, made up 57% of the entire export value of the United States. It was the oil of its day, the commodity that powered everything.
But here's something the sources really want us to understand. It is a huge mistake to only picture enslaved people working in cotton fields. They were the highly skilled workforce that built the nation's physical infrastructure. We're talking about the carpenters, the blacksmiths, the engineers, and the artisans who constructed the actual roads, bridges, and buildings of early America. So you've got this massive output of goods and infrastructure. But where did all that value go? Well, it didn't just vanish. It was systematically converted into financial capital that was used to fund the growth of the entire American financial system.
Let's just follow the money here, as the source lays it out. Step 1, stolen labor creates enormous profits from crops like cotton. Step 2, those profits are then used to fund the nation's first major banks, shipping lines, and insurance companies. And Step 3, that new institutional wealth then bankrolls the endowments of some of America's most prestigious universities. You can draw a direct line from unpaid labor straight to institutional power.
Now, this is where the story takes a critical turn. After 1865, slavery is abolished, and now you have two huge groups of people starting out in the nation's workforce: the newly freed African Americans and a massive new wave of European immigrants. But they were starting from two completely different places. And wow, this table from our sources just lays it all out in black and white. For the formerly enslaved people, nothing. No compensation for centuries of forced labor, denied access to land, and their citizenship was immediately suppressed. Now look at the European immigrants who were arriving at the same time. They received wages, they could get land through programs like the Homestead Act, and they had a clear path to citizenship and its benefits. I mean, we're talking about two completely different realities.
So here's the crucial point. The racial wealth gap that we still see today isn't some accident of history. The source material argues that it's a direct result of this divergence. One group was systematically cut off from the very wealth they had just created, while another was given the keys to start building their own.
But the impact of this system wasn't just contained within America's borders. The source argues it had a profound, lasting, and, well, devastating effect on the African continent itself.
What this chart visualizes is basically a zero-sum game. The very same system of extraction that fueled the explosive rise of Western wealth directly caused the stagnation of African development. How? By draining the continent of its single most valuable resource, its people.
And think about what was taken. It was more than just people. It was generations of innovation. It was political stability, as local powers were corrupted or destroyed to make the slave trade easier. It was the loss of economic momentum, the loss of generational opportunity. The source describes this as a deep and lasting disruption on a continental scale.
So, why is it so important to understand all this with such clarity? Because, as the source contends, the consequences are not in the past. They actively shape the world that you and I are living in right now.
And this brings us to the source's proposed revision, a slogan they argue is more historically complete, one that accounts for all the foundational pillars of the nation, even the ones that are really uncomfortable to talk about.
And this right here, this is the final, clarifying distinction. It's not about erasing the contributions of immigrants, it's about differentiating them. Immigrants, with their paid labor, absolutely helped build the nation. But the argument is that it was the centuries of unpaid, forced labor of enslaved Africans that provided the massive capital base that made America wealthy. Build versus wealthy. That's a powerful difference.
And that brings us to the end. The goal here, according to our sources, isn't about placing blame, but about achieving a more complete understanding of the past, which leaves all of us with a final, challenging question to think about. What changes when we tell this story, the whole story?